need. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you had a refreshed short break. So now we're going into the second element of the program. Basically, we're going to be having a presentation by the COO of PASA, Bongani Saidini. And just before that, we've officially started the live stream. It's available on YouTube. So you can go on Twitter and hashtag YouthJobImbizo, hashtag SYEC on Twitter. So basically, PASA promotes exploration for onshore and offshore oil, gas resources and their optimal development on behalf of government. The agency regulates exploration, production activities, and it also acts as a custodian of National Petroleum Exploration and Production Database. And with that further said, I'd like to please welcome on stage Mr. Saidini, the COO of PASA, to give us the presentation on more. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Program Director. Thank you for including us in your dynamic program, Mr. Makanya. It's really a youthful program. I'm the CEO of the Petroleum Agency, SA. As already stated, we are the regulator of the upstream petroleum sector in South Africa. Part of what we do is to assess the prospectivity in terms of oil and gas of our country, which I will talk to right now. We also play an advisory role to the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy in terms of the award of petroleum rights in the country. Ours is to also ensure the sustainable development of oil and gas resources in the country. So I'll be giving you an overview in terms of the prospectivity that we see in South Africa. And we will also talk to you about the Upstream Training Trust, which is a fund that we administer as the Petroleum Agency that is meant to support skills development in the upstream petroleum sector. So I have on stage my colleagues, Nozik Kokin, as well as Zama, who are going to talk to or present on the Upstream Training Trust. Mine is to just give you the overview of the prospectivity that we see. I guess I'm a bit handicapped. The slides are behind me, but let me see how I manage. If you look at this map, okay, on the West Coast, which is to my left, South Coast, and East Coast, we see prospectivity. If we look at the total prospective resources in the country, we see up to 60 TCF or trillion cubic feet of prospective gas resources. Just to give that or to put that into context, there is a gas to liquids refinery in Mossel Bay. It's a refinery that is processing gas into liquid fuels, petrol, diesel, paraffin. That refinery has been in existence or started producing fuels in 1992. It ran out of gas in terms of offshore production in 2020. So that refinery has run for 28 years on the back of 1.5 TCF. So we see potential in the country at 60 TCF and you ran a refinery of the scale of about 45,000 barrels per day equivalent in terms of production for 28 years on the back of 1.5 TCF. So you can just gauge the measure of how big that potential resource is. In terms of oil, we estimate oil in the region up to 30 billion barrels. That is a significant potential. I'll make an example. Angola has in proven oil reserves about 7 billion barrels. The difference being, if oil reserves are proven, it means they are commercial, they can be produced with current available technology. In terms of our resources, which being prospective, they are not yet discovered. So Angola is discovered and is producing from 7 billion barrels. We are sitting with prospectivity at close to 30 billion barrels. And at 7 billion barrels, Angola is producing on a daily basis about 1.1 million barrels. I want to give you a sense again, what is 1.1 million barrels? South Africa's consumption in terms of crude oil, the crude oil that we process at the various refineries in this country is about 700,000 barrels per day, right? Angola is producing 1 million. So if we were to prove up these resources that I'm saying are up to 30 billion barrels, it means we would be self-sufficient in terms of crude oil production in this country. And so meaning we are currently reliant on imports of crude oil to process at refineries. It means we would be self-sufficient, we would no longer need to import. If we are no longer importing, we currently import in terms of crude oil and petroleum products, I think about 150 billion barrels. 150 billion of imports in this country in terms of crude oil and petroleum products. So you would no longer need to be spending that amount of money on imports if you were self-sufficient in terms of crude oil, which we think we have enough of if we were to allow companies to explore for it. What that would mean, it would also mean we no longer have all these dollars flowing out of the country for the importation of this crude oil and petroleum products, therefore having a positive impact on the balance of payments of the country. Just to make another example what this means in terms of gas, there is a power plant in Mossel Bay called Gorikwa, which is adjacent to the gas to liquids refinery. If this gas was to be, or in fact, we've already discovered a bit of gas on the south coast, that gas could also be utilized to convert that power plant from it's currently run on diesel to run on gas, which is a much cleaner fuel. So for these resources to be discovered so that we are in a similar position as Angola, we need to conduct seismic acquisitions, do the seismic surveys as well as drill. And I'm sure most of you would know that our 2 seismic surveys have been interdicted recently. I think one was end of December, the other was in February. Those interdicts ultimately could mean stop exploration for oil and gas. If they were to succeed in saying these seismic acquisitions is not something that's desirable for this country, the implication is that you could never prove up these resources because you will no longer search for oil and gas. If drilling was to be stopped, it means these resources will remain prospective because they would never see the light of day in terms of production. So with that would go energy security of supply. With that would go local beneficiation. With that would go socio-economic development that's associated with oil and gas. We've seen the positive impact of oil and gas production in Mossel Bay and the Southern Cape economy. We'll talk about it during the panel. The jobs that you are looking for as the youth would not materialize, as well as many other opportunities associated with oil and gas. This slide is just showing you some of what we call near-term developments. This means these are gas discoveries in the main that, or gas that has already been discovered in the main. We have gas, most of you would have heard of Total Energies and Partners discovering gas on the South Coast. They've discovered gas to the tune of 3 trillion cubic feet, which is significant, is double what the gas that enabled the establishment of the GTL refinery. And they are planning to develop that. This is gas that was discovered in 2019 and 2020. They are planning to develop that to the tune of 30 billion rands to 100 billion rand. That is a significant investment. So the initial phase, 30 billion rands, total development could be 100 billion rand investment in this country. That could potentially be chased away if I guess we don't get the consents we need to do this. We've got several other discoveries onshore. What I've been talking about is offshore in terms of total discoveries on the South Coast. We've got onshore discoveries. As I'm speaking to you, we have in the Free State near Welkom a development of a helium plant as well as an LNG, liquefied natural gas plant, that is meant to monetize gas that's been found in Virginia. The estimates in terms of the cost of that development, 18 billion. We've got other potential developments where resources have already been discovered. The Lephalale, coal bed methane in Limpopo, 8 billion or so. We've got gas in Amersfoort, Mpumalanga, 1.2 billion. So there's prospectivity in this country, significant prospectivity. There are also discoveries and near-term developments that will be going ahead, and we will be seeing production from those, from Virginia Gas, for example, this year already, from others, 2024, 25, 26, and so on. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a sense that this oil and gas sector that we are talking about has significant potential. And with the development of that sector comes a lot of potential for jobs and opportunities for the youth. And ours is to say, at least we should go ahead and ascertain that potential. And you can only do that through investment by the private sector, because it's huge investments that comes into this. I'll make an example. To drill one hole to search for oil, it will cost you at least $100 million US dollars or 1.5 billion barrels, and you could lose that money. You might not find that oil or gas. Some wells, development wells, can cost up to 200 million US dollars, 3 billion. You need these multinational oil companies to invest these amounts of money, these 100 billions that I've shown, in order for those opportunities for the youth in terms of the petroleum sector to be realized. At this point, I'm handing over to Nozi to take us through the Upstream Training Trust. Nozi, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nozibele Xhotyeni, representing the Upstream Training Trust. As part of my presentation, my job is mainly to kind of like fill the gap from where Mr. Saidin left it off, as far as the role of PASA within the South African oil and gas industry. So I think the main content of my presentation will focus on these 2 or 3 questions. What role does PASA and UTT play in making sure that the country provides skills development initiatives? What role does the Upstream Training Trust play to ensure that we bridge the skills gap? With Mr. Siding having indicated that there is oil and gas potential in the country, which therefore means that skills and training within the sector is required. Okay, my presentation is going to focus mainly on, I'll give a bit of history about the Upstream Training Trust. I'll talk briefly about our strategic plan as the trust. I'll speak on bursary funding, which is one of the main objectives of the trust, and also touch on which institutions do we actually fund as the trust. Please note that our funding is mainly focused on the oil and gas industry within the country. I'll touch on project funding and also our involvement on career awareness and exhibition events which are related to the industry. I'll touch on industry engagements which UTT participates on and end off with employment opportunities. Are we able to present any employment opportunities? If not, how are we bridging that gap? Okay, a bit of background, historical background. UTT PASA, I'm sure some of you are wondering, we were getting a presentation from Petroleum Agency SA, but now Upstream Training Trust comes in. How are we related as these entities? As Mr. Saidini indicated, PASA is the main government regulator within the country that is responsible for promotion of exploration activities in the country. Those activities which we promote, therefore means that PASA has to go out there and look for investors, which we call operators. Once these investors, investor A up to investor 6, once they come to South Africa and identify specific exploration opportunities, then they apply for what we call license fees. They do this through the government regulator, which is Petroleum Agency SA. Once those fees are paid, then they go to a fund within government. Now, as part of their agreement and the conditions of the licenses which they get, part of that requires these operators or these investors to pay fees towards skills development within the South African oil and gas industry. That's where UTT comes in. UTT, therefore, is the trust fund that administers these funds which are meant for skills development. We get directly administered by PASA. We fall within the operations of PASA as far as our events and how we promote the industry. So these funds come to UTT, and UTT utilizes them in the form of providing bursaries for studies within the oil and gas industry. And this covers both the upstream, midstream, and the downstream sector. And those mean that we look on the exploration and production, we look on transportation and storage and refineries. So any studies which are related to those fields within the oil and gas industry, UTT provides funding for. And at the end of it, the end result, we're hoping to have people who are skilled and qualified to be able to work within the industry. So that is how PASA and UTT relate. As I said, UTT was established in 1997, so we are 25 years this year, and we are administered by Petroleum Agency, and I indicated, how we work together. So as I indicated, our funds come from the fees which are paid by those investors in my previous slide, or what we term the operators. Our main mandate as the trust is to make sure that we provide bursaries to qualifying students. Our main mandate is to make sure that we provide these to students who qualify to receive such funding. And we also make sure that we provide these funds to people who will also acquire the necessary skills and education that is required by the industry. Bursary funding, what studies does UTT fund? What fields of study do we focus on? On that slide, those are the fields of study which we fund as the trust, and those are the main fields of study which are required by the South African oil and gas industry. And just to give like a bit of an idea as to how much funding we have provided in the industry over the past 10 years, you will see the numbers of students we funded like from 2012 up to 2022. Our numbers are increasing like quite well, and I guess this is mainly because of the new skills and the qualifications which are required by the industry. So our funding amount, as far as the number of students that we fund, is increasing every year. Which institutions do we fund? We fund all institutions that provide studies which are related to the oil and gas industry, like studies like in geosciences, studies like in the engineering fields of study, which are related to the industry. So any institution, those listed on the slides, and others which do provide studies within, like studies which are related to the oil and gas industry. Project funding, what am I talking about when I talk about project funding? UTT focuses on projects which are intended to promote specifically STEM-related activities. Any organization which maybe is providing like activities like extra classes, maths and science mentoring programs, we do fund such projects. So the organization would approach the trust and they would submit to us like a project proposal, which we will consider and look at. And if we feel it's intended to promote the interest and also provide information like to learners and even like high school, and even university students, which has to do with any STEM field of study, then we consider such projects. So any projects like that provide academic support, and like for instance, even an institution that would approach us to say, we need assistance with getting kind of new physics lab equipment. An organization which will approach us to say, we need support with ICT like equipment. So all such projects, they do get considered by the trust to be funded. And just an indication again of the projects that UTT has funded over the past 10 years. In the beginning, there were quite a few because then just the country in general was not aware of UTT but I think at this stage now, we've kind of covered quite a few of the provinces, in fact, all the provinces in the country, and I feel that most entities who operate within the STEM field is quite aware of who UTT is. So those are the kinds of the numbers of projects that we fund as far as the funding amounts for each year. When I said project funding and the entities, those are the projects that we will be funding for the current financial year as UTT. And as you'll see, kind of like the diversity of the scope of the projects, from mobile science labs, to tutoring programs, to lab equipment, to workstations for some academic institutions. And also on this slide, there's more on the projects, where we fund projects which are related to field work, which is required as part of the studies, within institutions, and also some research programs where we're funding a project which is working towards, which is focused on the carousel gas, and also doing research on that. So that's more an indication and the amounts of projects which we're currently funding as the Upstream Training Trust. Industry engagement and career awareness events. There would be no need for us to exist if we don't get to engage and be out there and be seen by the communities out there. So we always make sure as the Upstream Training Trust that as an entity that operates within the oil and gas sector, we get to be visible within industry, we get to be visible in public as well. So towards the end of the last financial year, which is January to March 2022, UTT for the first time hosted our own career awareness events, and these events were held in the 4 provinces that you see there, and those are the regions or the district names which we covered for those events. Those were mainly events where we invited grade 10 to grade 12 learners coming from non-fee paying schools, and mainly learners who are studying for maths and science, because we believe that in order for us to get the right pool of students to actually pursue studies in university, we need to catch them at high school level. We need to promote the interest in maths and science at high school level. We need to make sure that they get to be aware of what opportunities are available at tertiary from high school. So that was one of the reasons why we came up with initiating a project of that kind. And those are the social media platforms where you can find UTT, as well as all our activities and involvement around the country. And to end off, that's just an indication of the events which we hosted about 2 weeks ago within the country. And if all happens like as we wish, we will then be covering the other 5 provinces within the current financial year. Thank you so much.
Okay. We will now take questions. Thanks, Nozi. Okay, there are hands. Okay, do we have a program director to manage the hands? Okay, so I'll just point at the person and you raise the question.
Morning, everyone. My name is Ongezwa. I'm from Langa. I just want to ask you a little bit about most of the time in your presentation, I only see universities. But what about colleges? Because there are people where I live in Langa, they are studying in colleges. But when it comes to those projects, I don't see them. Like I'm one of them. I'm a student in Northlink College. But now I can see, when I see your presentation, I can see that I'm not qualified because I only see universities there only. But what about colleges? And also there's other question I need to ask you about. In high schools, you said you go to town. But I would like to suggest one thing. Can you please go to the towns, like example Langa Khayelitsha, to make an exhibition about the program, that because many of us don't know anything about this program. I'm just, like example for me, it's my first time to hear about this. You see, it's my first time to come and hear about this. So thank you very much, ma'am.
Oh yeah, sure.
Good morning. Thank you for this. My question is in two folds. One, what happens with midstream and downstream? Are there trusts which are focusing on those, especially distribution? There are people who would be interested in that. Also midstream itself. And then my other question was, is UCT excluded by mistake on the list of universities?
Thank you. And my questions were around, we've talked about exploring the massive opportunities there are in oil and gas, but we must also now ask a question of at what cost. I think as youth, we will still need to be here in 50 years from now, and climate change has been a conversation that's been brought. So I'd be very interested in finding out really what are the, what is the implication of what those explanations would mean on our country in terms of the climate change issue. And then, is there also a scope, because the new finance phenomenon of environmental and social governance investing, which focuses on green opportunities, is what really attracts investors to come invest in our country. So is there a scope, or is this a red zone for those kinds of investors which are looking for green kind of projects to work on? Thank you.
No, thank you so much for the lovely presentation. I think I really, really appreciate it. And COO, thank you for bringing the UTT through, because I think we were also exposed to quite a few things that we weren't aware of. So what I want to ask, number one, COO, I think I heard you briefly touched on it, but I would have loved you to expand on it. The discoveries of oil and gas in South Africa, what do they mean to our economy? But to break it down, what do they mean to the price of fuel? Because we know that petrol, for instance, is quite expensive, and that has a multiplier effect. So us discovering this oil and gas in South Africa, what does that do to the factors that influence the price of oil and ultimately the price of fuel? Number two, these discoveries of oil and gas, for instance, what are the specifications of the opportunities that are available from the get-go? For instance, in the exploration and the process that follows after that until the end, which is the distributory phase. And if we are to tap into those discoveries that you mentioned, and we, let's say, for instance, we do make those discoveries and we do find oil and gas there, how many jobs are we possibly looking at? I know numbers can be problematic, but your estimation, since you're an expert in this area. I know possibly in the next panel this will be touched on by Mr. NJ Ayuk, but I know the interdicts that you speak about in courts have in one way or the other forced investors to move to other regions in the continent. You look at your Côte d'Ivoire, you look at Namibia, and other parts of the continent. What did those discoveries in those areas where they took place, what did they yield and how have they meaningfully impacted on their economies, particularly the local people there? Then with the UTT, maybe this could be a recommendation because these interdicts that we normally see in courts are a result of inadequate consultative processes with communities. So for instance, as young people, we are not aware of the fact that the energy mix dialogue is one which is critical because we know for a fact that coal emits more carbon, way more than gas, for instance. And we know that most countries or most parts of the world make use of gas instead of coal. So discovering this gas in the country, what does that mean for the energy conversation, particularly around the carbon emissions, and lastly, load shedding, because I think those are very critical initiatives. So if you could touch on that. Then lastly, to back up my sister here, the opportunities. Have you considered the fact that this oil and gas discoveries from the get-go, they must not only be limited to assisting or empowering those who go to ivory towers institutions like your VETS and UCT, but a young person in Langa who does not have the opportunities to access such institutions? Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, I don't think I introduced myself in the first
Oh, additional
round.
questions?
My name is Ntabi Singh, and my question is also directed to the COO. I just want to find out, with Indonesia's latest ban commencing on the 28th of April, I think today, anyway, so they are banning their oil exports. I just wanted to find out from you, what impact would such what are the consequences of such? Because we do know that they account for a third of palm oil, for example, of global palm oil supply. So what impact will that have on the livelihoods of South Africans?
Should we start with UTT, or the difficult questions you've posed on the oil and gas, I guess? Okay, let's try. And the questions you are posing are quite difficult questions, colleagues. We thought we will be talking here about opportunities for youth in oil and gas. You are asking us about climate change. So we were misled in terms of what we are here for. Okay, just a joke. Okay, colleagues, really, you're taking us on a path of climate change when our purpose was really to give you a sense of the potential impact of oil and gas, and particularly opportunities for youth in oil and gas. Your interest seems to be maybe opportunities in climate change. Okay, at what cost? That's the question being asked. Yes, there are potential benefits in oil and gas, but at what cost, I guess, to climate change? And I think one of the speakers then helped us in responding to that question in saying, yes, there are commitments to move to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. A number of countries have made such commitments, including our own country. we do recognize that oil and gas do have an impact on climate change. We do recognize also that there is a transition towards net zero carbon emissions, and that transition must be just. Yes, climate change mitigation is better served by renewable energy sources, solar, wind, and so on. Are those ready? Can we really do that immediate switch to those without energy security of supply or economies grinding to a halt in terms of energy security of supply? So there are also technologies. So let's, our country, for example, heavily reliant on coal in terms of power generation. The impact of oil and gas in particular, if we transitioned towards gas, it means that the gas would reduce our carbon dioxide emissions associated with coal. I don't want to venture into, of course, methane gas itself is a contributor to climate change, but if you looked at the switch or the shift, gradual shift from coal to gas, you expect the climate change in South Africa, or our contribution to climate change to reduce, or at least in terms of carbon dioxide. And also, I think central to the discussion or debate around diversified energy sources is really that we still require energy security of supply for the country, for economic development and for economic growth. Without energy, you are not going to be, you're not going to have economic growth. Without energy, a lot of things, a lot of development is not going to happen. So we really need an orderly and just transition that recognizes the need for energy security. Okay, what are the exact opportunities in oil and gas? Okay, exact opportunities for young people. We've presented here in terms of the skill set that are required by the upstream petroleum sector. This country, okay, we've not had much oil and gas in this country. As a result, we do not really have the skills that are relevant to the oil and gas sector. So what are the opportunities? If we need to start positioning ourselves, we can see the prospectivity in the country. We can see opportunities, job opportunities in the future if these resources were to be developed. So there is an opportunity for the youth to take up employment if they equip themselves with the relevant skills. And we are enabling the development of those relevant skills, for example, through initiatives such as the Upstream Training Trust. There are also opportunities for the youth and opportunities in local beneficiation. For example, make an example, Mossel Bay. Mossel Bay was a sleepy town before oil and gas development there. I have said earlier we produced gas since 1992 in Mossel Bay, and that town became alive. We saw a lot of development in Mossel Bay in terms of social infrastructure. Okay, maybe let me take you back. We saw development of malls. I think this one is for the panel. Development of malls there. We saw development of other social infrastructure, the industry investing in schools, investing in clinics. We saw job opportunities in terms of local people being employed. I think during construction, for example, there were job opportunities up to 5,000 or so when that plant was being constructed, both in terms of the local community and elsewhere where construction was happening, for example, in Saldanha and PE. So there are opportunities in terms of you having the relevant skills, becoming geoscientists, geologists that are going to support the sector, the petroleum engineers that are required to support the sector. And there are opportunities also in terms of business opportunities for the youth and for local communities in terms of the related industries that develop on the back of oil and gas, but even directly in terms of oil and gas development itself. Okay, I think in the main, colleagues, your questions centered around impact of oil and gas, local communities, climate change, which I think in the main I've responded to. The other questions relate to UTT, which Nozi will take. Nozi?
Okay, I think I've got 3 questions which were directly related to like my presentation. The first one was around, the lady indicated that she saw the slides and they focused mainly on university and University of Technology Studies and funding for bursaries, and what about like colleges, for instance, and she mentioned like one specific college. Yes, as UTT, we also operate, kind of like in communities where we get like to be aware and, like, and we're learning like as time goes on. As I said, like, yes, we're 25 years now. 15 years ago, some of those colleges she's referring to, they were not offering specific kind of fields of study, which we do find now. Because of time, a lot has changed and a lot has evolved, like as far as the colleges and what they currently offer. So we've become aware, like in the past year or two, within UTT, that there are fields of study which are directly related to what the skills, like to the skills which are required by the industry. I'll make an example, for instance, like of artisanships and artisans, like kind of like are related like studies, which I know that most like operators, especially during kind of like the exploration side of things, as well as even like the production side of things, where such skills are needed. So we as UTT are currently, doing a bit of our research as far as that is concerned, identifying those specific fields of study, and hopefully like in the next year, like or two, we'll make the necessary revisions to our kind of criteria and our regulations in order to accommodate like students like who are also studying at colleges. So there is something that we're working on like in the pipeline. The second question had to do like with high schools and the career awareness events like in townships. I'm happy to say that I've been with UTT now, it's like for almost 2 years. And I would say that like in the past year, last year, we were kind of like actively visible. I know that in Nyanga and a little bit like in Kailicha, where we started like with the first initiatives, where we approached like a few high schools. We had a career kind of like expo set up in one of the schools, high schools in like in Langa, where I think there were about like 5 to 6 high schools which attended like the event. So that was the first, hopefully like of many to come, especially with UTT being based like locally, like in Cape Town and all that. Such initiatives, I'm sure we can easily put together and organize and make ourselves available. So we will ensure that we've got a good working relationship with the Department of Education, like in the Western Cape. So we'll ensure that, we go back to the department and we try to engage with, broader communities and reach out to more townships within the Western Cape, like first, before we go to other provinces. So you can rest assured, Sisi, we will follow up on that. I think the last question was more about our funding. Is it only for upstream skills and qualifications, or does it cover midstream and downstream? I believe we cover the whole value chain, oil and gas industry, oil and gas value chain from upstream up to downstream. And this is indicated by the fields of study, because some qualifications which students pursue at universities, they allow them to acquire skills which are required by both the midstream and the downstream sector. So as far as UTT is concerned, we cover the whole value chain of the oil and gas industry. I think those were all the questions. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, my name is Simamkela Jamjam. I am a master's student at the University of the Western Cape. Mr. COO, I have a question. I know your internship program opens every 3 years. I think it's been 3.5 years now and it's still not open. When is it opening? When is the post coming? We want to apply.
Good morning, everyone. I don't think I have a question, but I do have a comment. I also wrote the questions down because I think they're quite interesting. My name is Mimi. And in terms of climate change, right? So for me, I think that, for example, I'm opening an article here that I'm going to read to you guys. It says that Africa accounts for the smallest share of global greenhouse gas emissions at just 3.8%, right? And then in contrast to 23% from China and 19% in the US, right? And 13% in the European Union, right? These are developed countries that are emitting the most carbon dioxide. So for me, I feel like it's best for each country to follow a just energy transition that speaks to their systems, that speaks to their socio-economic problems, e.g., we are heavily reliant on coal, so there is no way to jump from coal straight to renewables, according to what I can see, right? So, for example, now we have, you asked about Indonesia cutting crude oil exports and so forth. How that affects us, let's look at Russia now and what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. How is that affecting us? Fuel prices are high now. It's affecting everyone indirectly. Why? Because we don't have our own oil and gas. We can't rely on our own oil and gas. So whatever happens globally affects us as South Africans as well. So if we had our own indigenous supply of oil and gas, these things wouldn't be affecting us. So politically, we rely on other countries. Like, for example, we import our oil from Nigeria, from OPEC countries like Saudi Arabia, Angola, as the COO has mentioned, and Ghana, countries like that. So if they decide, well, we want to sell our oil for this much today, we have no choice. We have to buy because we don't have our own oil and gas. So that is the importance of us finding our own resources. So if the coal price is changed, for example, it's not going to affect us because we have our own coal. Like now the European Union is going through an energy crisis and they're buying coal from South Africa. We can elevate the prices if we want. They don't have a choice, they'd have to buy. Those are the impacts of exporting or having your own versus having your own resources. And then, what does it mean? Okay, that is climate change, that is the fact. And then now we also have technologies such as carbon capturing, right? So when it comes to climate change, we're not saying we're not considering it. We have methods that will work for us. Carbon capture will be one of the methods that will work for South Africa, looking at our systems, right? So we can still produce coal, but why can't we explore new technologies that will help us produce coal in a less emitting manner? Why can't we do that? Like moving from coal, like the COO mentioned, to gas, we are already cutting our emissions by 40%. That's a lot. And yet Africa as a whole is contributing 3.8%, you see? So I feel like it's a transition, it's a journey, it's not a jump. We're not jumping from fossil fuels to renewables. And also another fact that I should put here before I stop this whole thing is that when it comes to green energy, we're talking about wind, we're talking about solar, we're talking about things such as hydrogen, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, whatever color of hydrogen, right? So when we talk about wind and solar, you can't have wind turbines everywhere in the country. It has to be a place that is windy, right, for you to produce that. Solar, same situation. And then when it comes to solar panels and wind turbines, you need land as well. Do we have land to even have those infrastructures? No, we don't. So there are a lot of socio-economic, I think, factors that we have to look at as South Africans and look at what works for us now. We can't jump from point A to point B if we are not even at point A. We have load shedding. We have fuel prices that are high. So we don't have energy. How can we transition if we don't have energy? Thank you.
Hi, I don't have a question as well. It's just a comment piggybacking on your comment. I think it's dangerous to look at countries and continents and look at them in terms of their contribution towards carbon emissions, because the environment is not stagnant. What Europe is emitting is not stagnant in Europe. What South Africa is emitting is not stagnant in South Africa. The atmospheric winds move. I think the events that we've seen in the past few weeks in this country are not necessarily the result of the carbon emissions of South Africa, but in actual fact, the carbon emissions are on a global scale. So I don't think we can talk about problems being caused by European countries and European countries having to lead in terms of the solution. And absolutely, they should lead in terms of the solution, as they are the primary distributor of the carbon emissions and the primary reason for the climate change we're seeing today. But one cannot say it's a European problem and we'll move at our own pace. We cannot move at our own pace because we also have to catch up to the fact that we too are being negatively affected by what's going on globally. So one cannot stick their hand in the sand and say it's someone else's issue to fix for us. We have to be a part of the solution as well. And in being a part of the solution, we're open to the opportunities. And in being open to the opportunities is how we can possibly extract the minerals that are required for decarbonization, thus creating the jobs that are required in this country as well.
Okay. Oh.
I've just been briefed that we ran out of time, but mine is not merely a question, it's a humble request. Can we please make the presentation available for all of us? Because I think that's critical information that we would want to know. And it's very good that we are having this debate amongst young people in the energy question, because I must be honest, these conversations are normally a preserve of white old males. So it's very good to have young black women discussing the energy segment. So it's very good to see this at play, because the basis of the formation of the South African Youth Economy Council is to make sure that young people, the youth, discuss critical things that affect our economy and our day-to-day lives. And it's very important to make it clear today that PASA must work with young people who hail from Langa, who have brilliant ideas that can assist us in solving the energy crisis in this country. It's very important that PASA must ensure that there is a coordinated African voice going into COP27, which is going to be held in Egypt, Africa, so that we make sure that the world must know Africa's position on the climate question and on the just energy transition. Because I agree with the two speakers. As much as we need to preserve the climate, we need to eat now. We want jobs now. And if coal or oil is going to give us jobs, unfortunately, we need to eat. That's my submission. I rest my case.
No, thank you. I guess at this point, just to thank you for very insightful questions, and I think also insightful comments in terms of how best we can navigate the just energy transition, how best we can strike the balance between enabling oil and gas sector, whilst on the other hand, trying to mitigate climate change. So thank you very much, colleagues. I think on the internships, yes, you are correct in saying we periodically look for interns to further develop, and we also absorb some of the interns. So some of the likes of Mimi, for example, is one of those interns who has now graduated to be a fully fledged employee and who is now representing us here very comfortably and confidently on matters of global interest. Others is Zama here next to me, also a master in geology and now in technical compliance. So she's assisting us in terms of assessing applications for petroleum rights, for example. So, but be on the lookout for those opportunities. Continuously monitor our website and have conversations with the likes of Nozi, Zama, and Mimi in relation to opportunities specifically at PASA for interns. So thank you, colleagues.
All right. Thank you so much to the COO of PASA as well as colleague Zamano Zibile. We are slightly running over time, but do just bear with us. We would now like to call upon the national spokesperson of the South African Youth Economic Council.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Can I get I don't know, a yes, a shout? Are we alive? We are a gathering of young people, so we cannot be dull. We need to be passionate about job creation and finding solutions to the crisis that we see ourselves in at the moment. And right now we're going to have a very exciting conversation, because I think when we talk about job creation, we talk about it from a top-down approach. We don't break it down and look at where these businesses are being created that are supposed to create jobs, who is supposed to be the major stakeholders in all of those things occurring. And so our panel discussion today is themed as the topic of localizing economic development. And we've got quite a few interesting panelists today that we're going to have join the conversation. So I'm going to call them up one by one, and you can just take a seat right here on the stage. And as our MC did say, my name is Thandiwe Msomi, and I serve as the National Spokesperson and Communications Manager of SAIC. So I'm going to call upon our panelists today. The first one has already spoken to us, but we're going to have him on again. Please may I call upon the COO of PASA, Mr. Bongani Saidini. Give him a round of applause, please. Awesome. The next person who will be on our panel today is Miss Anne Mufamadi. She serves as the head of small-scale mining at Mintech. Give her a round of applause. Next up on our panel is Ms. Nozugo Mani. She serves as the head of mineral economic development at Mintech. And then lastly, we will have our final panelist join us virtually. I'm just going to ask the crew at the back to put him up on the screen. But we have Mr. NJ Ayuk. He serves as the executive chairman of the African Energy Chamber. Awesome. Can you just confirm with me at the back if Mr. NJ is able to hear us? Cool. Awesome. We're going to get this conversation started. And just to set some context for today's conversation, right? We hear a lot of conversations about economic development and how exactly our government of the day wants to grow our economy and create jobs for young people. And many of the goals and targets that are put in the National Development Plan really cannot happen if we don't have municipalities cooperating with businesses, if you don't have a secure energy supply, if you don't have the financing of small businesses in ordinary communities to actually operate, but not just locally, but also internationally, because foreign capital and foreign direct investment is super important to growing the economy. And we want to see more South African businesses, not just competing locally, but also dominating the global market. And all that goes down to what happens on the ground on a day-to-day basis when a young person goes to SEDA and submits their business plan for funding, or when a young person or a young business owner applies for mining rights. So that's the kind of conversation that we're going to have today. And our panel is very much centered or focused in the energy sector, which is fine, I guess. We'd love to have more people in other sectors, but energy is critical to powering the businesses that are supposed to start or create the jobs of tomorrow. So I'm going to start off by giving each panelist sort of 2 minutes to give us their take of what localized economic development looks like within the different organizations that they serve. And I'll start with our COO.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. What does localized economic development look like? This is localized economic development in the context of the youth, I guess. I'll keep on going back to Mossel Bay, colleagues. We are in the oil and gas space as the Petroleum Agency, and the only production that has ever happened in this country in terms of oil and gas has been around Mossel Bay on the south coast. I think I've mentioned earlier we have produced gas since 1992 on the south coast, which fed a gas to liquids refinery, but we as a country have also produced oil around Mossel Bay or in the same offshore. We all produced oil from about 3 fields starting in 1997. And I think I've mentioned earlier that there are a lot of youth that were sponsored on the back of oil and gas developments in Mossel Bay, to an extent that we have the bulk of the petroleum geologists in this country, or a number of them, were supported on the back of bursaries coming from the oil and gas sector, particularly the government-led development in Mossel Bay. We have seen what is called enterprise supplier development happening in Mossel Bay, where you had young people being sponsored, for example, given a 5 million startup capital to provide services to the oil and gas sector, for example, to the refinery in Mossel Bay. Some ended up providing services such as in instrument mechanics or as electricians. And some of those businesses have grown such that they are now getting opportunities outside of the Mossel Bay environment in other provinces. I think we've also seen, for example, skills development in the form of artisanal skills. Most of the boiler makers that are used around Mossel Bay are coming from a school called the Center of Excellence, where the oil and gas sector, or PetroSA in particular, developed these electricians, instrument mechanics. This is beyond your geoscientists and engineers, and welders, and all of those artisanal skills, to a point where they passed trade tests and they end up being absorbed within the refinery as employees. And on an annual basis, you've had such programs, or that school having at least 150 people being developed in terms of artisanal skills. And this is just to show, even at the local level, if we don't only focus on tertiary education and postgraduate programs, but more in particular, the opportunities that were given to young people in terms of establishing businesses with startup capital and sustaining those businesses.
Thank you for those remarks. Ms. Anne?
Okay.
You have the power mic. You can go on.
Good morning, colleagues. Am I audible? Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question, Ms. Chair, but I do believe that I would not be doing justice if I don't give a bit of a background about Mintech, which is our organization that we come from, before I can actually go and answer your question.
Not a problem.
Yes. So Mintech, we're a state-owned organization that reports to the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy under Minister Gwede. So basically, we based in Randburg, in Johannesburg. That's where our offices is. So what is then the mandate? So I'll just give a holistic background of who we are as an organization, what we do, and how we do what we do, before I can actually get to the impact and the role of Mintech in SMMEs and youth empowerment. So on the value chain, I'm sure a lot of us here are quite aware of the mining value chain, but if I can just give a bit of a background on the mining value chain and the role that Mintech plays in that space. So we play from the second stage of the mining value chain through to rehabilitation and closure. And what do I mean by that? So from mining, this is the second stage of the mining value chain, And then you go through to concentration, your extractive metallurgy, through to smelting and refining, and right all the way to manufacturing, and also eventually mine closure. Oh, okay. I'm not even, okay, I was just.
We do see the presentation.
Oh, okay, all right. I don't think I can just, So, with that said, we have a very minimal contribution that we play on the exploration stage. However, we do conduct geochemical sample analysis and mineral ore characterization. That is just the role that we play. So what do we do as Mintech? So then our activities, they range from initial investigations to process development and design, as well as through to commissioning of industrial plants, So while we do this, we work with our stakeholders. We're very close with our stakeholders, where we create and customize the technology packages, and also in conjunction with the engineering partners, so for optimization and process development. So that's how we do what we do. Now, going back to the impact, it's very critical that I highlight Mintech core business, which is centered around 3 areas. One being research and development and technology innovation. What do I mean by that? As Mintech, we're able to produce efficient mineral technology, mineral processing technology. That's what we do. That's what we're known for. And we also develop value-added products and services. Maybe I should just pause that a little bit and then move to the second pillar of our core business, which is now the industry support, because we support the industry through the establishment of, we foster the industry establishment and expansion, particularly in the field of mineral sector, And after that, we then take the technologies that we produce and bring to the market, to the industry. And we use what you call a market pull approach. So what we do assessments to actually find what are the needs of the market, so that we know whatever that we produce, it speaks to the market. We don't just produce anything that we will not be able to take it to the market. We don't want to do a market push where we take our technologies to the market and it turned out it's not something that they require. So we use that approach in our development. So third pillar of our core business, being the human capital. That's where you see a role that we play, particularly in the SMMEs, because we develop our human capital and organizational skills, because we want to be able to build world-class research and development. So how we do that? We focus on high schools, where we offer bursaries to the students to study, because we encourage the SET approach, or SET category, which is science, engineering, technologies. I had a lady who was talking about the focus on colleges, would want to focus on colleges, but because of the nature of the job that we do not have metallurgical studies, or maybe they are very minimal metallurgical studies in colleges. Hence, we focus on universities. So once they finish, they come. We work for us as interns. We train them up to a level where they are able to be qualified as engineers. Then now they can go to the industry and serve to the industry. So we do that under that human capital development. So in other way, how then do we make an impact? We form joint collaborations with stakeholders where we identify areas of synergies. We see what do you have and what do you have. We come together, we form collaborations, and now we're able to create programs that will make impact in communities. So also we develop technologies for small scale mining. And also there's a program that we run, which is called Mine Rehabilitation Program. We run that program in different provinces. And how we create impact, it creates a lot of jobs in the communities where we operate, you know, because the communities where we operate are our first priorities, be it in the procurement processes or be it in job creation, because we know that unemployment is a very challenging issue in South Africa. So with that said, I don't want to take everything. I would like to hand over to my colleague who will then elaborate more on some of the initiatives that the organization is offering. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks. And there's quite a few interesting points that you mentioned that I'm going to pick up from, I think, after Mr. NJ Ayuk. But Ms. Anne, you can also explain the role of MINTEC in localized economic development.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Just to bring it down, from our colleague who has given us an overview and so on, just to talk maybe specifically to some of the programs that MINTEC has been involved in. So we've been involved in skills development. I was glad that there is that effort on skills development on the oil and gas side and so on. So we've been providing those skills specifically in small scale mining and also some beneficiation. So we've also been providing technical or technology support also for the small scale miners and so on. So in other words, at the end of the day, you have your large scale mining organization, and then you have people who are aspirational, junior miners and so on, who are not at the same level as your large scale mining, even having them even at artisanal level, where it's still, it might be just a family or a local community and so on and so forth. So in terms of our support, we've been maybe looking at the skills development side. We've been offering different training courses. For instance, now when you process the information that we're giving, is that you'll see that now it's not necessarily only pitched at your tertiary level. So some of the training that have been done have been pitched at your national qualification levels 2, 3, 4, which is pre your university, for instance. So your small-scale mining training, for instance, is a training that will be running around the country in collaboration with the Mining Qualifications Authority in terms of skilling the people who are coming from the mining communities and including your labor sending areas to a certain degree. So now this, if I have to talk about one of our basic ones, you'll find that it's information that gives you basic information on the geology, information on compliance, whether it's on health and safety, acquiring, you mentioned the mining permits, mining rights and all of that, that information is covered there, and the basic activities on operations on a mining site. So that entry level, when you do such courses, they're not looking for degrees, or we're not training people for degrees. We're giving people practical skills that they can use there. So with that training, in fact, if I have to mention the small-scale mining, we actually are currently also training. There's a group of women, it's in collaboration with the DMRE. It's a training called, it's for women diggers. So this is where we find young women now. A women diggers program where they get trained by MINTEC on your small-scale mining, and then they get hosted by mining houses. And they spend some time there to be exposed. Some of them, they've never had the privilege of being studying at high institutions and all of that, but they have they are in mining or they want to get into mining. So they get hosted by mines, so we're collaborating with mining houses as well that are willing to host them. And as a result, after that, then they get helped in acquiring these permits and business skills and so on and so forth. This is a collaboration between the Mining Qualifications Authority, it's MINTEC, it's the DMRE. So there are programs like that that are available on the ground. But further than that, we've been to especially your marginalized communities or rural communities, where you'll find that there's more mining taking place in those areas, and you can find that there's more precious stones that are found in those areas. We know, for instance, an example, the Northern Cape with diamonds, the rose quartz tigers are, you name them different precious stones, you find them in those areas, and we've been into those areas to offer training and incubation services where people get trained in stone cutting and polishing. People get trained in making jewelry out of those things, so beneficiating the minerals or the stones that are available in those areas. And in some cases also we've trained people also in ceramics. And also even when it comes to clay testing and characterization, we've done those things for community members. So there's a couple of things that we've been doing on the ground in those areas. I know we've had a center in Priska, for instance, in the Northern Cape, in Uppington. So these are areas that are very far from many other opportunities that may be enjoyed in some other areas. But in brief, those are some of the things that we are doing. And also in looking at supporting your small scale miners through your technology demonstration centers. She talked about the core of what Mintech does. So in other words, apart from mining and taking the mineral out, what do you do with it afterwards? How do you maximize the value out of that? Those are some of the things we expose the beneficiaries to.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those remarks. And we're going to bring in Mr. NJ Ayuk right now to also comment on what localized economic development means, but not only just for South Africa, but as the representative of the African Energy Chamber. It would be interesting to know how localized economic development also impacts how competitive we are in the global economy. So my team at the back, are we able to get Mr. NJ on the screen? All right, okay, we seem to have a few technical difficulties, so we will touch base with him as soon as we can get him online. But I think from the opening remarks of all of our panelists today, it is quite interesting that a common theme in everything that you have spoken about is the support that Mintech and PASA give to suppliers and small businesses through education and funding, as you mentioned, the ESD program of 5 million rands. And as powerful as that is in making a difference in trying to get young people to participate, it is quite disheartening to also see other state-owned enterprises let industries down. We can talk about Transnet and how the railway system has prevented growth in the mining sector, because there's so much coal that we could be exporting and transporting, and that really needs reliable networks in terms of railways and other technologies. So when we talk about localized economic development, I would be interested in understanding how the impact of other, businesses in the value chains, especially in your sectors, has on the ability of youth-owned businesses to scale up and grow and participate, and what kind of action do we need to ensure that those important entities actually operate the way they're supposed to, in terms of actually contributing to other businesses being able to participate and grow in their capacity. And perhaps I can pose the question first to the CEO of PASA.
Oh.
You have a lapel mic.
Okay, I think maybe let's talk about what localization, what is localization in terms of the core of the oil and gas sector. Say you make a discovery in terms of oil or gas. Let's talk about gas. That gas you can either export, or both oil and gas, you can either export gas, would be in the form of liquefied natural gas, or oil, you export it as crude oil. Or you can process it locally, meaning you then locally beneficiate. I've made an example of how gas found on the south coast was locally beneficiated in Mossel Bay. And so oil beneficiation, for example, could mean you think there was a refinery that was even conceptualized at some point, but most of South African refineries run on oil. So local beneficiation would mean oil that is discovered in this country is processed at the local refineries to the extent that the specifications are compatible with those refineries. So refineries, either whether they run on gas or oil, there are a number of ancillary services or supporting services. I'll make an example. In the production of liquid fuels, petrol, diesel, and so on, there are chemicals that are used there. Those chemicals could potentially be supplied by SMMEs, by businesses run by young people. You've got things called catalysts, which speed up or enable the chemical reactions that must happen in the production of liquid fuels, which are an opportunity for young people if they really want to participate in the core of the business. Even in the upstream petroleum sector, we have a provision for BEE participation, for example. Yes, it's quite capital intensive. You need, of course, billions to participate there. But the current legal framework, MPRDA, does provide, and related regulations do provide for local participation in the form of a 10% participation interest that's provided for BEE companies, for example. So there are opportunities in this space. There's also opportunities, for example, once you've processed this oil and gas, you produce these finished products, trading of those products. So ensuring that these products reach the markets, there's opportunity there for young people and local people in the trade of that. And some of the byproducts are traded as far as European countries. For example, you have as byproducts drilling fluids in some refineries which can be exported. You even have things like liquefied petroleum gas that is used for heating in our homes. That is a very big business that local people and the youth can participate in.
Thank you. And maybe, Ms. Anne, you can also share on the importance of those ancillary businesses and services in supporting youth-owned businesses in the mining and minerals sector.
Yeah, no, definitely. I was just thinking now as you were speaking that even when it comes to mining, sometimes, especially at your SME level, before you can even talk about how other entities or other organizations can hinder the progress that you have. We were mentioning Transnet, that you'll find that even within the sector itself, just to get up and going, there are a number of challenges that come with that. For instance, the challenges such as obviously lack of knowledge. If you don't know, you don't have the geological information in terms of the minerals and all of that, which is why you can find that people can easily run to one place where they say, no, there's diamonds here, we all flock in there. But there is information that's available as you have your council, like Council for Geoscience, who have that information and so on. So you'll find out sometimes it's even the challenges of not even knowing where to get up and go to in terms of accessing information. But there are also other issues in terms of the health and safety and environmental issues, since we're on the topic of climate change. But there are environmental things. I know you were not here for that. Yeah, but I mean, there are also environmental things and compliance issues that your small-scale miner or your junior miner will have to deal with. And some of it comes with a big price tag. And how does an entrepreneur overcome that, for instance? Even applying for the license and the rights is not something free. So there's capital that must be coming forth before even someone is able to get up and do the work itself. So these are some of the things that people need to even, the help must be at that level as much as possible. And obviously access to technology, I think that's what Nozuku was also mentioning, that Mintech with its research, because that's one of our core activities at Mintech, is to go into research on the latest technologies in supporting the industry. Now getting that access to support and also the capital just to get going and so on. And obviously by the time you're done, just to the infrastructure, the logistics to get in there, then you have many other players that actually might be a stumbling block to an SMME who's trying to get, you mentioned the exports, the railway system and all of that. Obviously, those are things that need to be looked into. I know someone had mentioned that it's very important that there is collaboration within these entities in just making sure that the whole value chain, an entrepreneur can be able to run their products and business in that way.
Thank you. Just to add a little bit on what my colleague has said, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of joint collaborations, because we believe that we cannot work in isolation with other organizations. So for us at Mintech, it's all about impact, whether it's social impact, economic impact, or environmental impact. It's how we make impact in the communities that we operate in, because that is in line with our priorities. And the focus has always been on mining affected areas, you know. So we try and equip them with the skill for life, you know, something that we know that it's gonna stay forever. They can use it even beyond. So thank you.
I did see Mr. NJ Ayuk briefly on the projectors. So can I just get some indication from my team if we can still get him on? All right, we're still struggling, but siyakuba nonetheless, I guess. I think there have been quite a few interesting remarks, and you all made mention of technology, which is super important, and it's actually linked to our next panel discussion after this session. But I want to touch on that quite briefly, because South Africa today still has the mining sector contributing a huge share of our exports in the global markets. Yet we find that a lot of our imports are still machinery, equipment, and heavy items that have what we export as main components of it, which is something that should change over time. But I guess my next question is, how can we ensure that the technologies that we need to participate in the oil and gas industry or the mining industry are technologies that we as young people who may own businesses can actually produce? And perhaps this is tied a lot with what our industrial policy is. Do you think that our industrial policy at this point in time supports that? Because if we could have youth-owned businesses produce a lot of this equipment, we would grow local economies at an exponential rate. So I'd love to get your take on whether or not our industrial policy is tied or is rather conducive for growing youth-owned businesses to be able to participate in not just the primary activities of oil and gas and mining, but also the secondary and tertiary. And perhaps we can start with Ms. Anne from Mintech.
Well, what I would say, obviously technology has to evolve. I think my colleague was trying to go to that at the end of the day. I think there was a big discussion also on the climate change, the just transition. All of that will require technology at some stage and the adjustment into that technology. So at the end of the day, I think you might have been speaking about on the skills that will be required to be able to do that technology. For instance, if mining underground doesn't need to be done by people, there will be maybe robotics is coming in, then you need the people that can actually operate that, and that obviously also improves safety, which is why it's very important. I know someone had mentioned the issue of colleges. I know there's quite an effort to get your TVETs in those skills. That may not be necessarily be your degrees and so on, but the people who come up with skills, I think someone mentioned, you mentioned boiler makers, artisans, you know them, you name them. So those are the people that can bring in the technology as they need to be adjusted to the next technology that ensures health and safety in the mines, whether underground or not. I think it's very important that the work that you do as well, that is targeted at those areas. But definitely, even at the lower levels where we can have people that can operate even the technologies that are coming. It's good that we talk about 4IR, but who's going to monitor 4IR and make sure that it is implemented? So there's this evolving of skills and all of that that has to come in and so on. So as Mintech, obviously as a research institution, which is one of our main core activities, is to be making sure that those technologies we're mentioning for young people, can they access that to make sure that they can thrive in their in businesses or something like that. Technology is a very important part of that. I don't know if you want to add on that.
Yeah, I cannot I cannot emphasize any more better than what she has already highlighted. There's a need for diversification, and we need to embrace the 4IR because we are evolving, times are changing. But I'd like to talk more about that on the next session because it's a topic that is very close to my heart, and because by the nature of Mintech, we're a science council, and also we are in the space of technology transfer, you know. So, but we still have a long way to go, you know. Yeah, thank you.
And Mr. COO?
Yes, technology plays a very critical role in the upstream petroleum sector, and it is evolving or evolves at quite a fast pace. So I guess the role of young people in terms of that, because the technology also that supports the upstream petroleum sector is highly specialized technology, and it's also fairly capital intensive to develop. So to best position young people, it's more to equip them with the skills required to utilize that technology. For example, to assess the prospectivity of the country that have shown their estimating so much oil, so much gas, there is technology in terms of geological software, geophysical software, petroleum engineering software that the youth should be able to utilize so as to be able to contribute, for example, to such studies, which information which ultimately is the information that enable us to say to investors, we think there may be oil and gas here, but can you come and explore and ascertain that indeed this oil and gas may be there. So, and we've also heard of controversial technologies, for example, such as the technology used to produce shale gas. If you've heard of potential in terms of shale gas in the Karoo, young people need to get close to such technologies, understand them, understand their use, and they might be part of the discourse as to whether what the risks associated with certain technologies can be mitigated. So youth must position themselves to understand technology, to be able to use it, and maybe even develop solutions that assist mitigating the risks that are associated with certain technologies.
You know, the conversation about skills is a double-edged sword in this country because NSFAS has obviously opened up the doors of learning to a lot more people ever since the advent of it increasing the amount of people that can apply. And so we've got a lot more graduates now, and we've got so many young people in the labor market who are able to work. But another issue is the demand side for that labor, and whether or not they actually have companies to go and actually work for. And so that also raises the question of whether or not we need skills, or whether or not we also need to simultaneously focus on the ability of young people to have some sort of ownership and equity in our economy, right? And we cannot talk about that, especially when it comes to oil and gas and mining, if we don't talk about the land question in this country. And the very fact that before you even want to go start your mine, you need to have that land. And, you know, industries like the mining sector, the oil and gas sector, today are still dominated by many big companies who have been in existence either pre-apartheid or who have the capital to compete in that market. And so while we have an abundance of incubator programs and skills development programs, are those programs actually going to yield a good effect or a beneficial effect for young black landless people if we don't have a clear land reform policy in this country that actually allows young people to have access to land with minerals that they can mine and turn into a sustainable business? And perhaps I could pose that question to Pasa.
Okay, I guess as far as the the search for oil and gas is concerned, the prevailing legal framework, I guess there was foresight in terms of the land question there. in the sense that the mineral resources in this country belong to the citizens of the country, and the state is the custodian thereof. This implies even if you own a piece of land as whomever, a private person, you cannot stop any young person, or you cannot stop accessing that land for the purposes of searching for oil and gas resources. So the land question is really dealt with in the sense that you will still have access to that land, you can still explore for that oil and gas, you can even develop that oil and gas on the back of this framework that says that your land can be accessed in order to access the mineral resource or petroleum resources beneath that land. So I think the land question is settled in the context of oil and gas. You have access to that land by virtue that you hold a petroleum right, be it exploration right, that can ultimately turn to a production right. You will have access to the land pertaining to your exploration right.
And as it pertains to the mining sector?
Yeah, without taking away from the DMRE, which is a custodian, in terms of our minerals and anything, I think the question that you brought in is very important when it comes to the land rights, because some of the challenges that some of the beneficiaries or small-scale miners that we deal with will say, in some cases, they'll actually say, well, I can't apply for a mining license where I am because the whole area is tribal land, for an example, so I can have my own personal aspirations on this land. But apart from that, I know there is also some provision, because the good thing that you've raised these things that we can't talk about the minerals without talking about the land itself. I know, for instance, there's the artisanal and small-scale mine policy. I think it's just been gazetted that looks into that as well, that land rights as well are very important, because in some communities you've had people who have been mining in those areas for donkey years, and to say that they can't do that or they can't apply to mine in those areas, these are some of the challenges that they have. Or you find out your large-scale mines are actually in a land that they found them there. And so those are some of the things that have to be dealt with. But I do know with the policy, what it tries to do is also to encourage your small-scale miners and artisanal miners to form cooperatives. That way, in communities, for instance, where they're exposed to such land or is their local land and so on, that perhaps certain areas could actually be zoned off for those communities to mine there or to be able to get access to mining rights in those areas. But definitely, I think in this case, I would say DMRE will do a better job than me in talking about land in this issue.
And Ms. Nozugo, your comments?
Okay. My comment is that it is simple. I strongly believe that the land is not an issue, but the policies are an issue. So we need to be able to create the right policies that will enable people to empower themselves. So because there are areas that have got land that is not being used. Or for instance, I'll take a typical example. You see a mine dump, it's ownerless. That is a land that is not being used. You could actually take that land and process and perhaps convert it into another use, agricultural use, so that people can have access to jobs. It will create a lot of jobs. But what makes it difficult for our people is the policies. So if we are saying, let us create the right policies that will enable people to empower themselves, I think those are my parting shots.
Definitely. We've also seen in recent times, and perhaps this is a question more relevant to PASA, that a lot of the gas... Sorry about that.
Yes, a lot of the exploration activities that have been going on have been opposed by many communities across the country, particularly, if I can make an example of Shell's seismic exploration along the Wild Coast in recent times. So from your perspective, Mr. COO, what do you think creates contention between local communities and big companies that want to explore economic opportunities within a region? And how can we fix that so that we can actually unlock the jobs that may lie within that space?
Maybe just to our own experience, especially the search for oil and gas has not been opposed necessarily by many communities. We have seen there's been 2 recent cases, or in fact, those are in terms of offshore. The only cases that we are aware of where the search for oil and gas has been opposed. So what gives rise to the resistance towards what is called seismic acquisition? And okay, maybe what does this seismic acquisition do? It enables, it's a key technology in terms of the search for oil and gas, because it allows us to identify potential oil or gas bearing structures, meaning it points you exactly where oil and gas might be. Why has it become contentious of late is because there is now an emerging view that this technology might be detrimental to the environment, marine life, and so on. But I think the other contention, or the main contention actually is potentially detrimental to marine life. But the position of the courts really, the courts have not really determined whether this technology is detrimental to marine life or not. They have granted those interdicts, or the court granted the interdicts largely on the basis of a consultation that might not have been adequate, or that the courts, in terms of the interdicts, deem not to be have been sufficient, adequate. Consultation of local communities, consultation of interested and affected parties. This technology, seismic acquisition technology, is really, there is no evidence globally. It's technology that's been used for over 50 years. It's been used globally in many countries. In South Africa, it's been used such that in the recent past, we've had at least 12 or so seismic acquisitions. Those acquisitions have had no impact on marine life. The most recent was, I think it's 2020, even 2019, by Total and Shell, which led to those discoveries that happened in Mossel Bay. So this technology is not, it's largely sound. There is no blasting or fire or ignition that happens. It's mainly a sound source that is released under pressure that then goes to the seafloor, makes the assessment, it sends up the information that's required that we can then interpret. So the issue really at play is that the rights, for example, to Shell, exploration rights and so on, were issued under the MPRDA, so 2014 or thereabout. There is now and in terms of, and the environmental authorizations associated with that were granted and complied with the requirements of the MPRDA. There is now, then there is what is called a one environmental system, or there was a migration from certain activities being governed under the MPRDA to move to the National Environmental Management Act. Then there's, last year, there was an amendment in terms of the environmental impact assessment regulations associated with the NIM that now required, for example, activities that were previously not necessarily, not listed, right? So like this seismic acquisition, is now a listed activity that requires, for example, consultation to be much more almost like lean towards consensual, when consultation in terms of the MPRDA was largely just consultation. It requires consultation to be, I think, more meaningful and so on. So the issue is really the disconnect between whether the law, particularly the NEMA, applies retrospectively, meaning a right that was granted and complied with the MPRDA is now, in terms of the new law, should now be judged in terms of the new law or assessed in terms of the new law. But I think the main issue really is whether there was adequate consultation. And I guess we recognize the new, the prevailing legal framework, and we are encouraging companies that are now applying for exploration rights, even those companies that hold exploration rights, to go back in some respects to the communities where there is an opportunity and consult more meaningfully. And even the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy has begun a process of reaching out to the communities to explain to them, give them information on oil and gas developments, potential socio-economic impact thereof, the related technologies and risks associated with those technologies, and how such risks can be mitigated. So there are risks associated with technology, but there are also mitigation measures. And so that there's that kind of reaching out to communities in relation to the search for oil and gas. But we have said earlier, there can be no progress without energy. And we need all available energy sources to ensure that there can be that progress and there can be a socio-economic development.
Thank you for breaking that down for us. And I'm definitely going to end this panel discussion soon because I know we're crunched for time. But we cannot have a discussion on localized economic development without talking about municipalities. And it's quite disheartening that a lot of municipalities in our country have found themselves under administration or not having their financials in order with the Auditor General. So one then questions the importance of municipalities in actually facilitating the growth of the SMMEs that Mintech or PASA has either in their ESD program or supply development programs and other programs that you have respectively. So I'd just like to get your thoughts and comments on the role that municipalities must play in ensuring that youth-owned businesses can actually operate sustainably and benefit from the programs that your entities have. I'll start with Ms. Nozulu.
Okay. Thank you for that question. I think the role that municipalities should play within the mining companies is to form joint collaborations. It's very important that they engage and come to some sort of they form partnerships, because I strongly believe that there are documents and policies that encourage or they all about growth in municipalities, and also if they form partnerships with mining companies. For instance, mining companies have got documents that you refer to them as SLPs, social labor plans. So if they work together, they are able to achieve a lot more with those, because SLPs, they've got programs that are dedicated for mining communities, especially in where these mining communities take place. So we as Mintech were able to form partnerships with mining companies to say we've got customized services that we can actually provide in the form of SLPs, because we've got accredited courses that we do provide. So I think there needs to be a collaboration between companies and municipalities in order to be able to promote economic development.
I think just in addition to that, you'll find that also when it comes to the thing which we had mentioned, the issue of mine dumps, for instance. So you'll find out that there are mines who actually hand over or expect the municipalities to take care of that part of mine dumps and how they can utilize those to develop the local communities, for instance, as their contribution to the local economies. So you'll find that now if the local municipality is not ready for that, you'll find that that opportunity could be lost. Whereas when we, like Nozgo said, if you embark on collaborations and get the right technical partners and institution that can help to get a resource like that, to get it in a way to give opportunities and generate income for the local communities, whether it's through starting through skills and development, and actually starting operations even in mining those dams or remining those dams or processing those dams as an example. So there's a lot actually that local municipal administrations can actually do with collaborations to really realize these local economies in those areas, because they are very key, your local municipalities, in that they are the center of things. So sometimes it's problematic if there's activities taking place and the municipalities are not there, whereas those communities will rely on support from the very local communities, or those municipalities are doing some of the activities outside of collaborations where there's a need for technical assistance and other very important aspects of ensuring success of any initiatives, especially when it comes to youth development in those areas.
And Mr. COO?
I guess there's an opportunity, for example, associated with disposal sites, waste disposal sites. Some of the waste disposal sites are either managed by the economies or by the municipalities, or are actually owned by the municipalities. Some of them, for example, the case of in Mossel Bay, they are actually owned by the petroleum sector, for example, the Petro SA there. And I'll make an example. That disposal site is such that the sector, Petro SA, is now allowing the municipality to dispose there on a site that was created to serve the refinery. But the potential business associated with disposal sites is that over time, there is gas in the form of biogas or methane that can actually be extracted from disposal sites. And in there is an opportunity for young people in terms of collecting that gas through the relevant technologies, and that gas can even be converted to power, and you supply that power to industry again. So I think I would align with the view of there could be partnerships between industry, municipalities, and young people in terms of exploring opportunities like that. And there are opportunities also in terms of partnership that can be explored linked to the social and labor plans, because those sometimes the companies commit, we will build a school, we will build a road, we will build a clinic. Companies owned by youth could be given those tenders to build that school, to build that road. So that partnership needs to be explored in the empowerment of youth.
Thank you so much for those remarks. We will head straight into a question and answer session. I'll keep it at 15 minutes. So can I just confirm if I have a floating mic for those who want? Awesome. So can I please have hands for a round of questions aimed at any one of our panelists? Anyone?
Perfect. Here.
Okay, going
All the
once.
questions.
Do you have a question, sir? Please.
Thanks very much. Is it audible? Oh, okay. No, I've got the audible voice, so I was going to use it. No, thanks. Let me also appreciate what the panelists are raising, but I think my worry is one, actually, is that in this panel there's a main actor that is not here, the department, because of all these things revolves around the department. One, including the mining charter. the willingness to implement the mining charter. Two, the intention or deliberate localization beneficiation. And three, the issue of the supply chain. You see, I hear many young people now are speaking about the land. The unfortunate part is that 60% of all the mining rights, they are owned by South Africans, tribal lands. They don't belong to white people. Unfortunately, white people come with money, buy them, or do whatever way that they want to do it. But there's no deliberate strategy for us to able to compensate that particular differences. DBSA, for example, what is their deliberate intention of making a point that there's a money that is being set aside? So SPIC, for young people collaborating with tribal council to start the mining, to start even exploring for that particular matter. That particular space is not there. And then the only time that that space can able to happen is when the department deliberately wants to do that. So as the local government, I think the district model that is being introduced now is trying to move to that particular thing, but unfortunately that our state is consistently working in silos. There's a serious power struggle. You can't come to me, I can't come to you. This DG wants to back this other DG. This minister does not like this other minister. It's not about the actual issues of able to deal with issues of development and convert what we have for it to able to benefit our people. Agencies, you can do as much as you can, but your mandate is limited and your mandate is derived from your shareholders who happen to become government. But if government cannot able to collaborate all that particular work, hence the president now speak about the district model approach, to say that if you go to Lephalale, we're speaking about this thing, today Rustenburg was supposed to be one of the metros because of the work that has been happening there for the past 20 years. But one, the municipality not willingness. Two, the province does not know what they're doing. Three, national government does not directly intervene to able to make that particular thing a city. Very soon, in 30 or 40 years' time, Rustenburg is going to be a ghost town because of all the minerals will be depleted and they are gone. And unfortunately, it's not going to affect those ones that are running it now. It's going to affect all these young people who are here. And then I think it must be a deliberate plan or intention of this council to say that, President, in your district model approach, this is what we want to see young people leading all these particular things. Let's forget about this thing. It's lost its expiry date of skills. Spoke about it. We've got enough skills. We've got enough resources to able to expand around skills. But how then do you able to make it these things practical and able to make it a point that Botswana is doing it successfully. When you come to Botswana, you know that you are going to own less than 50%. Out of that, less than 50%, 30% must be localized, and everybody who's supposed to be benefiting is supposed to be a Botswana citizen or a Botswana-born citizen. So why we can't do it? And unfortunately, we must be able to speak, and young people must stop it. In the heart of this thing is these old people who are corrupt. They just want quick scheme rich of getting rich. I don't know what they're going to do with this money when they're 60 and 70. I always ask myself that where are they going to use this money from? Because they're already old. Actually supposed to be them who worried about the future of their own kids. So I just wanted to make those comments to say that the heartbeat of young people, what we did now, for example, in NYDA, we have met about 4 departments. And we asked them the simple question, all of them. You've got 30% set aside of young people. Tell us or show us these young people. None of them could be able to come even to 0.5%. No, that money went back to Treasury. Why? No, we don't know where is this young people. But we've got youth agency that is for the state. Why didn't go to them and ask them? Or others, no. Young people, they are applying, they don't comply. Oh, okay. What efforts did you make? No, we don't know. We don't know. So I'm saying also that this council or this forum now must also challenge the NYDA. And the current chairperson of the NYDA is passionate about these issues. To say, NYDA is okay, let them put the prerequisite, become a filter to us. If we go to DMR and say that we want a mining license, they count all these things. NYDA capacitate us to able to comply. If we want a water license, capacitate us to able to be there to get a water license. If we want electricity, capacitate us to get that particular electricity. Then when we go to DBSA, when we go to PIC, when we go to the department, we say that we are compliant, we are young people, we are capable, give us money or give us the mining rights so that we can do it for our own. Thanks.
Before I allow the panelists to comment on that remark, do we have any other question or comment?
Just clear.
President,
clear. No,
you're
it's
still
just
going to
clear.
talk at the end. All right, no, I think the comment posed by the sir from the NYDA, is quite critical. How do we make these things practical for youth-owned businesses? And perhaps you could use that comment as the genesis or starting point for closing remarks. And I'll start with Ms. Nozugo on the far right.
Can I start? I need to go.
Okay, you can start.
I've been drinking a lot of water, colleagues, so no, I think, colleagues, maybe let me zoom into maybe where opportunity may lie for the youth in oil and gas exploration and production. The emphasis, I guess, of my input today has been oil and gas exploration is capital intensive. It requires capital-intensive technologies, and of course there are risks that you can invest money in drilling that hole or well and you might not find anything. I think that is really the context in terms of the offshore, where you drill a well for 1.5 billion or so. But onshore, I think I've also shown there are a number of what I call the near-term developments in Amersfoort, for example, Mpumalanga, in Lephalale in terms of coal bed methane, and even in the Free State in terms of Virginia gas. To get into oil and gas exploration onshore is not as expensive as the figures that I've provided for offshore. For example, you can drill a well onshore for 1 million versus 1.5 billion offshore. And also the actual applications for petroleum rights, let's say the initial stage of a petroleum right is what is called a technical cooperation permit, which you pay less than 1,000 rand in order to get that permit. And youth can organize themselves, for example, and apply for a technical cooperation permit. You are then expected to do a desktop study, assessment of the area of interest to you, to say, we think there is potential at high level, but there are certain activities that will have to be done as part of exploration. So to do that desktop study will cost maybe 2 million to 5 million. I know these are still big monies for the youth, but it's small monies compared to the 1.5 billion that I was talking about. What you then do, it gives you an exclusive right to apply for an exploration right, meaning you've now captured that area. No one else can apply over that area. You can then go look for partnerships in terms, you now go to petroleum industry, the established big companies, and say, I hold this right, which cost me, say, in terms of your study, maybe 2 million. I now want to move to the exploration stage, and this is now encumbered by me. Can you partner with me in the exploration thereof? Then the bigger monies, you can even say, you then take an equity interest in this. You take 50%, for example. You do everything going forward. The millions that need to be invested, they will be done by you, and I reserve a right to a 50% share. They then do all the work, but you need to be there as young people in terms of ensuring that you learn and understand the business going forward. And so you're not a passive person holding a right who doesn't know what was done in terms of the exploration. But all I'm saying, there is still an opportunity onshore where young people can organize themselves, actually obtain a license to explore, and then bring in the big players to carry them in terms of the forward work program. These big players do the same thing on offshore, for example, where the investment is really significant. Where Total has made a discovery in Mossel Bay, they are in partnership with Canadian Natural Resources, with Qatar Petroleum, and with a local entity called Main Street. Point is, even they themselves need joint venture partners to be able to really do the exploration, invest those monies in there. So young people onshore, maybe look to onshore, whether you can't, there is space there for the participation of young people and black participation in particular, because the costs are not as prohibitive as offshore.
Ms. Anne, your closing remarks.
Yes. I think in addition, in the same vein, I think also what NYDA provided us, there's a very important factor of making sure that there is collaborations, especially with state entities, so that people can get a nice package of support when they are venturing into these opportunities, especially young people, instead of being sent from pillar to post with no coordination in between for where young people can go for these opportunities. For instance, I think an example I can make, for instance, for a mining license, currently, as is given in Fana, the mining license for an artisanal small-scale miner is 2 years, and then thereafter you can renew it annually. And then what does that say to people who can potentially invest in your business? They don't know whether in the third year you'll still be there or not, because you're still going to have to go and apply for a license. So those are very important thoughts and things that young people should be challenging in terms of really, if we're really serious about development and making sure that we are sustainable in our endeavors as entrepreneurs. Those things are very important. Because also, I think the knowledge, there's a conference that we attended, I think it was in the Northern Cape, it was an investment conference, and some entrepreneurs there, they were saying, you keep telling us that there are investors in the room. Where are these investors? Because people were sitting everywhere. They said, put them on the left-hand side so that we know those are investors. You know, because at the end of the day, people also need investors, especially when it comes to their mining activities. In fact, there are investors who are even willing to get into partnership, even when someone just has a commodity statement. In other words, they've done the groundwork that shows that this piece of land has 1, 2, 3, and then they can help those people to start their operations in getting up and running. So I think the availability of that information is very important in state entities and government, making sure that information is available and is organized in that fashion. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nozuko, your closing remarks.
Yes, just to add to what my colleagues have already highlighted, mining by its nature is capital intensive, but there are always low-hanging fruit. And I'd like to focus as Mintech on the development of human capital. I'd like to encourage young people to go out there and knock the doors, you know. There's always a person who will forever be willing to listen. Knock those doors of DMRE. It doesn't matter how difficult it is. Go to those financial institutions that I don't want to mention by names, but there's always out there a person who's always willing to listen.
And on that note, I would like to thank my panel in absentia. I thank Mr. Bongani Saidini from PASA, and thank you so much, as well as Nozuko from Mintech. And thank you so much for being an amazing audience. This brings us to the end of our panel discussion. Can we please give our panelists a round of applause? And I will hand over the event back to our MCs.
Thank you so much for that very impactful panel discussion. I think there's so much to a lot of take-homers, such as a lot of the opportunities to still explore in the oil and gas industry and in the mining industry. I really, really think there's just a lot of room. What I also particularly liked with the MinTech was the speaking about how women are also getting involved in these mining houses, which is also quite a great initiative, and still a talk to integrate a lot of young women also in the sectors. So now, without further ado, since we are really running a bit over time, it's officially lunchtime. And then after that, lunch for 40 minutes, and then we will have a presentation from the South African Wind Energy. So basically the lunch will be at the restaurant, which is upstairs on your right. And also I would encourage that, just mingle around, everyone, students, corporations, and just really, really get to know who's who, what's happening, because like they said, Usis Nozuko said about just like going out there really, knocking those doors, because otherwise, but otherwise, enjoy lunch.